No one inside that small roadside diner knew what they were about to witness. Not the waitress refilling coffee cups. Not the families eating breakfast. Not even the teenage boys laughing loudly near the entrance. All they knew was that it was a normal afternoon. The neon sign outside buzzed softly. Plates clattered. A radio hummed low behind the counter. Everything felt ordinary, safe, until the sound of a slap cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to freeze time. A young disabled girl stumbled backward, her tray crashing to the floor. Orange juice spilled across the tiles. A fork rolled under a table. For a moment, no one spoke. The girl tried to steady herself, her hands shaking as she struggled to stand. One of her legs dragged slightly behind her. Her eyes searched the room, not for help, but for permission to exist. The boy who slapped her laughed. "Watch where you're going," he said, though everyone saw she had done nothing wrong. His friends snickered. Someone whispered. A man near the window looked away. The waitress hesitated, then kept walking. Silence wrapped the diner like a heavy blanket. No one moved. Except one man. At the far end of the booth, partially hidden by the window's glare, sat Steven Seagal. He hadn't been eating. He hadn't been using his phone. He had been watching. From the moment the boys walked in, loud, careless, hungry for attention, something about their energy had felt wrong. Years of experience had taught him that cruelty announces itself long before it acts. Steven's eyes followed the girl as she bent down, struggling to gather her fallen napkins. No one helped her. Not the customers. Not the staff. Not the adults who knew better. One of the boys nudged her tray with his boot. "Maybe you shouldn't be out in public if you can't walk right," he said. A quiet laugh rippled across their table. The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't cry. She had learned not to. That was the moment Steven's jaw tightened. Not in anger, but in recognition. He had seen this before. Not just bullying, but permission. Permission created by silence. The kind that tells bullies they are safe. Steven slowly set his coffee cup down. Around him, the diner remained frozen, suspended between fear and denial. No one knew who he was. No one knew what he was capable of. And the boys had no idea that the man watching them had spent his entire life learning how to stop violence, without becoming it. The diner had the kind of warmth that made people feel invisible and safe. Sunlight filtered through wide glass windows, catching the dust in the air. The smell of fried eggs and fresh coffee drifted between booths. A soft bell chimed every time the door opened. It was the kind of place where strangers rarely spoke, but everyone quietly noticed one another. At a corner table near the window sat the young girl. Her name was Emily. She was no older than 16. A light metal brace wrapped around her right leg, hidden beneath loose jeans. Each movement required focus, every step carefully measured, every shift of weight deliberate. What took others seconds took her concentration. She held her tray with both hands, gripping it tightly as she made her way back from the counter. This wasn't her first time here. The staff knew her. The cooks recognized her order. Most days, someone helped carry her food. Some days, she insisted on doing it herself. Today was one of those days. She wanted to feel normal. At the opposite end of the diner, Steven Seagal sat alone in a booth. A dark jacket hung loosely over his shoulders. His hair was pulled back. No sunglasses. No bodyguards. Just a man passing through town, stopping for a late lunch. He had chosen the corner seat out of habit, back to the wall, clear view of every entrance. Old instincts. Steven stirred his coffee slowly, not because he was thinking about the taste, but because stillness had always helped him observe. Years of training had sharpened his ability to read rooms the way others read headlines. And this room felt peaceful. Families laughed quietly. A mother cut pancakes for her child. Two elderly men argued softly about baseball scores. The waitress moved from table to table, calling everyone Han. Nothing seemed wrong. Until the door opened again. The bell chimed. 3 teenage boys walked in. Their voices entered before they did. Loud. Careless. Overconfident. They shoved past a man holding the door and laughed as if the world owed them amusement. Their jackets were half-zipped, their posture relaxed in a way that came from knowing no one ever challenged them. Steven noticed immediately. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were looking for something. Attention. Reaction. Weakness. They claimed a booth near the center of the diner, boots stretched into the aisle. One of them drummed on the table. Another tossed a straw wrapper across the floor. The staff noticed, but said nothing. The customers noticed, and looked away. Emily passed their table on her way back from the counter. She moved slowly, eyes fixed on the tray, concentrating on balance. The metal brace clicked softly with each step. One of the boys nudged another. "Yo," he muttered. "Watch this." Steven saw the glance. The kind that never meant anything good. Emily reached her table and carefully set the tray down. She exhaled in relief, proud she hadn't spilled anything. She didn't see them watching. Steven did. He felt the shift before it happened, that invisible change in the air when calm turns fragile. A laugh rose behind her. Then another. The diner kept moving. Forks scraped plates. Coffee poured. The radio played on. To everyone else, it was still just another afternoon. But Steven's eyes stayed on the boys. Because experience had taught him one thing. Cruelty doesn't arrive suddenly. It walks in smiling, and waits for silence to make room. Emily thought she had made it. Her tray balanced, her focus steady, she had reached her table without incident. The clinking of cutlery and hum of conversation gave her a small sense of normalcy. But the boys were watching. Not quietly, not casually. Their eyes followed her every movement, calculating, assessing, hungry for reaction. One of them leaned forward, nudging his friend. A smirk stretched across his face. "Hey, watch this," he muttered under his breath. Not loud enough for Emily to hear, yet. Steven's gaze sharpened. He had learned long ago how to read such moments. Before violence, there is intent. Before chaos, there is mischief. The air in the diner, previously calm and warm, now carried a subtle tension, almost invisible to anyone else, but obvious to someone who had spent decades observing human behavior. Emily bent slightly to set her tray on the table. She smiled politely at the waitress passing by, unaware that the boys were whispering behind her backs, plotting their next move. Then it happened. A cruel voice rose above the clatter. "Hey, cripple, what's the matter? Can't walk straight." It was a low, mocking tone, designed to humiliate. One of the boys had leaned over a nearby table, just loud enough for Emily to hear. She froze. Her fingers tightened on the tray. Her face went pale. A ripple ran through the room. Some customers glanced up, discomfort flickering in their eyes. A few gasped softly. The waitress hesitated mid-step, unsure whether to intervene. Steven didn't move. Not yet. He simply observed. His eyes locked onto the boy, calm but focused, calculating. Years of discipline told him, patience is power. React too soon, and the situation escalates uncontrollably. Wait too long, and the girl suffers. But the boys didn't wait. The first mocking comment was followed by laughter, then a shove. One of them kicked Emily's tray lightly. Coffee sloshed over the edge. A plate clattered to the floor, eggs sliding across the tile. Emily stumbled, trying to maintain balance. She looked around desperately, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. The diner was a blur of people pretending not to see. A man sipped his coffee slowly. The waitress continued serving another table. And the boys? They were delighted. This was their world, one built on intimidation and silence. Steven's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He had seen this pattern before. The first comment, the laughter, the shove, these were not isolated acts. They were a test. A challenge. One of the boys leaned close now, grinning cruelly. "Bet you can't even stand up by yourself, huh?" His voice carried over the clatter of dishes. He kicked the tray again, this time harder. The plate tipped, sending silverware clanging. Emily's breath caught. She bent down, gathering her tray, fighting tears she refused to shed. Her legs shook. The brace on her leg scraped against the floor. A flicker of fear passed across her face. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the booth and vanish. But she couldn't. She couldn't stop existing, not even for them. The diner fell into a strange silence. Not a complete quiet. Plates still clinked, forks still scraped, but the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Customers realized something had changed, something beyond spilled drinks or clumsy accidents. And Steven stood. Slowly, deliberately. Not in anger, not in haste, but in measured anticipation. The boys noticed. Their smirks faltered for the briefest moment. Who was this man? Why was he standing so calmly, watching? There was no threat in his stance. Yet, in some unspoken way, the diner seemed to respond to him. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered in the tension. The first boy laughed again, mocking, trying to regain control. What? You gonna cry too, old man? He thought he was in charge. He thought the room still belonged to them. But Steven's presence shifted the energy. There was authority in his silence, and patience in his gaze. He had already decided, this would not continue. And in that instant, the air in the diner thickened with anticipation. Every eye, every subtle movement, every silent customer, all waiting, unknowingly, for what was about to happen next. Emily looked up, unsure if she should run, fight, or hide. The boys were relentless. Their laughter echoed, cruel and confident. But now, something new had entered the room. Controlled power. A power that didn't need to raise a fist. A power that didn't need to yell. A power that demanded attention simply by existing. This was the moment the line was crossed. The boys didn't know it yet. They didn't see Steven's calm eyes. They didn't see the quiet strength behind his slow, deliberate movements. But they were about to learn. Have you ever watched someone humiliate another person, and felt the tension rise, knowing something bigger was about to happen? Steven Seagal's eyes never left the boys. Calm. Focused. Observant. Not a single muscle twitched, yet every fiber of his body was alert. Years of training, decades of experience, had taught him one undeniable truth. Confrontation is won long before the first strike. It is measured, controlled, intentional. He could end this instantly. In seconds, the boys would know exactly who he was, and the lesson would be harsh and unforgettable. But he didn't move. He didn't rush. He didn't give them the satisfaction of fear. Instead, he surveyed the scene. Emily, struggling to gather her spilled tray, tried to maintain composure. Her hands shook slightly. Her lips trembled. Not from weakness, from exhaustion and frustration at a world that often looked away. The boys laughed again. One of them kicked the tray, sending the cutlery clattering across the tile. Bet you can't even stand on your own, he sneered. Pride and cruelty glinted in his eyes. He had no idea that the man watching had spent a lifetime learning how to stop exactly this kind of behavior. Steven's hand hovered over his coffee cup. Not to grip it, not to throw it, but as a reminder to himself that patience is strength. He inhaled slowly. 1, 2, 3, and held it. Control. Discipline. Focus. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about ego. This was about protection. The diner held its breath. Customers sensed a shift, though they didn't understand why. Some whispered to each other. Phones were raised, ready to capture the spectacle. The waitress froze mid-step. Everyone could feel the tension, but they couldn't name its source. Steven's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Emily. It's okay, his posture seemed to say. Stay calm. Don't react. His eyes told her the truth. She was not alone. He could have moved faster. He could have shouted. He could have struck. Any of those choices would have ended the bullying immediately, but that was not the lesson he intended to teach. Strength, he knew, is not in the loudest action. Strength is in measured control, exercised when one has the power to act otherwise. Steven slowly rose from his seat. Every movement deliberate, every step measured. His presence alone began to shift the room. The boys noticed, but they mistook his calm for weakness. Old man thinks he's tough, one whispered to the others. Emily looked up, startled. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Someone was paying attention. Someone who mattered. Steven's hand extended subtly toward the boy's line of sight, a silent, unspoken warning. Not a threat. A boundary. A statement. Stop now, or face consequences. He stepped closer. Not aggressively. Not with anger. But deliberately, fully in control. His eyes locked onto the ringleader. "I don't think you should speak to her like that," he said evenly, his voice calm but commanding. The diner went silent. Even the hum of the coffee machine seemed muted. The words hung in the air, simple, yet heavy with authority. The boys froze, caught between arrogance and uncertainty. For a moment, the universe seemed to pause. Then one of the boys laughed nervously, trying to regain control. "What, you gonna stop us? Old man, go back to your seat." He stepped forward, chest puffed, testing the invisible line Steven had drawn. His friends followed his lead, emboldened by his bravado. Steven did not flinch. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. Every inch of him radiated calm authority. He knew exactly how dangerous these boys could be if he lost control, and he also knew that uncontrolled rage would only escalate the situation. The moment stretched. The audience, both inside the diner and watching silently through the story, could feel the tension. It was a question of courage, restraint, and morality. What would they do if they were witnessing this scene? Engagement question for viewers. If you were in this diner, would you intervene when no one else dared, or stay silent like everyone else? Steven's gaze shifted back to Emily. "You're okay," he seemed to tell her with his eyes. Protecting her without making a scene was his priority. His presence was both shield and signal. Danger may be near, but she was not powerless. The boys exchanged glances. Pride wavered for a split second, but quickly returned. They had never faced anyone like this before. They didn't yet understand that the calmest person in the room often holds the most power. Steven inhaled slowly again. One motion. One thought. Control. Discipline. Patience. The kind of strength that only comes from knowing exactly what you can do, and choosing what you should do. And in that slow, deliberate moment, the stage was set for what would happen next. Confrontation without chaos, power without violence, a lesson no one in that diner would ever forget. The tension had built perfectly. Every movement mattered. Every breath counted. And the entire diner, every witness, every silent bystander, was now part of a story that would soon go viral, not because of violence, but because of the power of measured restraint. Could you stay this calm if someone was hurting someone weaker than you? Or would your anger take over? The diner was silent now, but not completely. The hum of the coffee machine, the occasional scrape of a fork, the soft whir of the refrigerator, all of it felt muted, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Steven Seagal stood slowly, deliberately, his calm presence filling the space between him and the three boys. His eyes never left their ringleader, the one who had slapped Emily's tray, the one whose laughter had echoed cruelly across the room. "You still have time," Steven said quietly, each word deliberate, steady, controlled. No threat. No rage. Just authority. The ringleader laughed, but it was nervous this time. "What? You gonna stop us, old man?" His friends snickered behind him, emboldened by his mockery. They thought they were untouchable, that the silence of the diners meant no one would ever challenge them. But Steven didn't move aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, closing the space between himself and the boy in measured increments, each step controlled, precise, and purposeful. The boy shoved him. A quick, brash motion, intended to assert dominance, to test the limits. Gasps echoed across the diner. Some customers instinctively leaned back, clutching their cups. Phones went up. Even the waitress froze mid-step, her tray shaking slightly. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise a hand in anger. Instead, he shifted his weight subtly, redirecting the energy of the shove. His response wasn't aggressive. It was controlled, almost invisible, but it spoke volumes. The boy's chest collided with nothing but empty air as Steven adjusted just enough to remain unhurt and unshaken. For a moment, the ringleader's face twisted in confusion. Pride battled disbelief. How could this old man, this calm stranger, absorb the push and still stand unmoved? His friends whispered, unsure, sensing that something had changed. Steven's gaze softened toward Emily for a second. She was trembling, her hands clutching the edges of her tray, but her eyes widened with a spark of hope. Someone had noticed. Someone powerful. Someone who would protect her without making a scene. The boy recovered, chest rising and falling rapidly, anger overtaking hesitation. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he spat. "She's nothing. Who are you anyway?" Steven took a deep breath. Measured. "Step away. Apologize. And this ends," he said. The ringleader froze for a split second. The words were simple, but the authority behind them made the entire diner feel weighty, suspended in anticipation. For the first time, the boy realized that this was no ordinary customer. This was a man who would not be shaken. But arrogance is difficult to overcome. The boy leaned forward again, invading Steven's personal space. He shoved him harder this time, thinking he had regained control. The diner collectively held its breath. Steven didn't step back. Instead, he subtly adjusted his center of gravity, positioning himself to absorb the aggression without retaliating. It was a masterclass in control. One step back would have seemed weakness. One step forward could have escalated disaster. He found the perfect balance. The silence was electric. Phones were pointed. The young girl's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and hope. Other diners had frozen, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether they should. Every second stretched longer than a minute. Finally, the ringleader's friends exchanged uncertain glances. The bravado that had carried them this far began to crack. They had never encountered someone like this. They didn't yet know that power isn't loud, isn't chaotic, isn't angry. A third shove. Slight, careless, a test. The diner could almost hear the invisible line being drawn. Steven's body shifted slightly, controlling momentum. The boy stumbled, not hurt, not humiliated, but destabilized enough to feel the weight of restraint for the first time. Gasps filled the room. Even the previously silent customers whispered. Phones captured the moment. Emily's lips trembled, but she no longer looked alone. Someone had stepped in, without shouting, without striking, without chaos. The ringleader glared, disbelief mixing with frustration. He wanted a reaction. He wanted fear. But he found none. Only calm, only authority. Only someone who had measured power and chose to protect rather than destroy. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Every observer, every silent bystander, felt it, that moment when chaos is seconds away, yet doesn't erupt. The lesson was about to be learned. Audience engagement question 1. If you were watching this unfold, would you have had the courage to step in, or would fear have kept you frozen? Audience engagement question 2. Could you remain calm when faced with someone testing your limits, or would you have lost control? Steven's calm was unshakable. His discipline radiated authority without a word. The boys, testing him at every chance, began to understand that true power is not shown in anger, it is shown in control. The diner, which had been ordinary moments ago, now felt charged, almost sacred. Every fork, every sip of coffee, every footstep seemed to contribute to the suspense. Everyone was waiting for the inevitable clash, yet it never came. Instead, the boys stumbled, destabilized, humbled, frustrated, by the invisible force of someone who knew exactly what to do, when, and how. The moment had arrived for the controlled climax, the authority that would stop the boys without harm, the lesson in strength, restraint, and protection that everyone in the diner would remember forever. The diner was suspended in a strange, electric silence. Every eye was fixed on the three boys who had dared to humiliate Emily. Every heart felt the tension, a pressure that seemed almost tangible. The plates, the coffee cups, the chairs, even the fluorescent lights above seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Steven Seagal stood perfectly still. Not a muscle betrayed impatience or anger. His eyes, dark and focused, locked onto the ringleader. Calm authority radiated from him like a shield, yet there was no threat, no aggression. Every movement he would make from this moment onward would be deliberate, precise, and controlled. The ringleader smirked at first, still believing he had the upper hand. "What, old man?" he taunted. "You're not going to touch me, are you?" He stepped forward again, chest puffed, intent on proving dominance. His friends chuckled behind him, emboldened by the bravado of their leader. Steven's hand shifted subtly. Not a fist. Not a strike. Just a small adjustment, a calculated movement of his body, positioning himself perfectly to redirect any aggression. He didn't need force to stop them, he needed control. The ringleader lunged, swinging his hand as if to push or strike. But in one smooth, almost invisible motion, Steven redirected the boy's arm with precision. The motion wasn't violent, but it was exact, enough to unbalance him, enough to stop him, but not enough to hurt. The boy stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. The diner gasped. Phones clicked. Every witness froze, unsure if a real fight would erupt. But it didn't. Steven remained calm, breathing evenly, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who could have ended the situation entirely, and chose not to. He took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance just slightly, eyes still on the ringleader. "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped," he said, voice calm, unwavering. "You just need to be out of control." The boy's friends froze. Their laughter vanished. Confusion and fear crept into their expressions for the first time. They had expected chaos, anger, maybe even violence. What they got was precision, control, and authority, a lesson far more powerful than a punch. Emily watched from her seat, wide-eyed, her hands clutching her tray. For the first time in that ordeal, she felt safe. Someone was standing for her. Not with rage, not with shouting, but with quiet, unshakable power. The ringleader tried to regain composure. He squared his shoulders, puffed up his chest, and sneered. "You think you can just stop me like that?" Steven tilted his head slightly. His voice, calm and controlled, carried across the diner. "I don't need to strike you. You've already lost. Step away and apologize, or walk away now. The choice is yours." The boy's pride wavered. He glanced at his friends, unsure what to do. They hesitated. Never before had they encountered someone who could disarm arrogance without raising a hand. The diner itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome. Then, as if realizing the futility of resistance, the ringleader slowly stepped back. His friends followed, muttering to each other, humiliation creeping in despite their attempts to mask it. The defiance that had carried them this far dissolved into quiet regret and shock. The entire diner exhaled collectively, though no one had noticed they had been holding their breath. Plates clinked softly, chairs scraped lightly, and the hum of normal activity returned, but the tension lingered, a quiet echo of what had just occurred. Steven turned toward Emily. His gaze was soft now, protective. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by relief and awe. The other diners, who had been spectators to the silent showdown, whispered among themselves. Phones still recorded the moment, capturing the lesson unfolding in real time. Strength is not measured by the volume of one's anger, but by the precision of one's control. The boys were escorted quietly toward the exit, their arrogance gone, replaced by the understanding that true power can stop violence without creating it. They had learned a lesson they would never forget. Steven returned to his booth. He sat down slowly, his posture relaxed once again. No fanfare. No confrontation. Just calm, collected authority. A man who could have escalated the situation at any moment but chose restraint, discipline, and protection instead. Lesson: anger is loud. Chaos is dramatic. But control is permanent. Control commands respect, stops danger, and protects the innocent, all without a single unnecessary blow. Audience engagement question 1. If you were in Emily's place, how would it feel to know someone could protect you without raising their voice? Audience engagement question 2. Could you have the patience to stop someone without hurting them, or would anger take over? Audience engagement question 3. Have you ever witnessed someone stop conflict with calm authority instead of violence? How did it feel? The diner returned to normal slowly, but the memory of the moment lingered, a subtle, powerful reminder of what true strength looks like. The strongest person in the room is not the one who shouts, strikes, or dominates. The strongest person is the one who protects, who commands respect, and who acts with precision and control. The tension in the diner had dissolved, but the air still carried the memory of what had just occurred. Plates clinked, chairs scraped, and the faint hum of the refrigerator returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet, no one could ignore the weight of the lesson that had just unfolded before their eyes. The boys had been escorted quietly to the exit. Their friends followed reluctantly, shoulders slumped, faces pale with the sudden awareness that arrogance and cruelty have consequences. They left the diner not defeated by physical force, but humbled by something far more powerful: quiet authority. Emily remained seated at her table, clutching her tray. Her hands trembled slightly, and a small tear traced down her cheek. She had experienced humiliation moments ago, but now she felt something entirely different: safety. Relief. A sense of justice restored. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Steven Seagal approached her slowly, the calm authority he carried never faltering. He knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. No grand gestures. No dramatics. Just a question filled with genuine care. Emily nodded, unable to speak at first. The tremble in her hands and lips remained, but the fear had lifted. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. Around the diner, the witnesses began to breathe again. Some exchanged glances, silently acknowledging what they had just seen. A few whispered, amazed at how one man's composure had stopped a confrontation that could have escalated into chaos. Phones were still recording, capturing every subtle motion, every controlled step, every calm word that had prevented harm. No one had seen a fight. No one had seen a punch thrown. But everyone had seen power. Real power. Steven returned to his booth, sitting once more in quiet observation. The room felt different now. Lighter, yet charged with respect. People glanced at him, realizing that the man they had seen in silence had done something extraordinary. He had stopped cruelty without anger, without chaos, without physical domination. By the next morning, the story of the diner had spread online. Videos surfaced showing the brief confrontation, the precise movements, the calm authority. Headlines read, "Disabled girl protected by stranger in diner, lesson in real strength. How one man stopped bullies without violence." The story didn't go viral for shock value. There were no dramatic punches, no injuries, no blood. People shared it because of the lesson, because it reminded them of something simple yet profound. Strength is not in rage. Strength is in control. Strength is in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Emily returned to the diner days later. She walked in carefully, brace clicking softly against the floor. The staff greeted her warmly, smiling knowingly. She looked around for the man who had protected her, but he was gone, vanished as quietly as he had appeared. His lesson, however, remained. The witnesses, the staff, the customers, and even the bullies themselves carried the memory. It was the kind of lesson that stays with a person for life. That authority and control, exercised with discipline, can accomplish more than aggression ever could. Final moral. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest. Not the one who shouts, strikes, or dominates. The strongest person is the one who acts with intention, who protects without harming, who commands respect through calm authority. Steven Seagal's presence had been enough. A single man, acting with discipline, had changed the outcome of an entire room. He hadn't needed to raise his hand to prove a point. He had merely chosen restraint, precision, and protection. Final engagement questions for viewers. If you witnessed someone being bullied, would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Do you believe true strength comes from restraint and control rather than aggression? Who in your life demonstrates quiet strength and discipline like this every day? The story ended quietly, without fanfare. No celebration, no applause. Just a diner full of people who had witnessed something rare. Power without violence, authority without rage, and protection without chaos. And in that silence, one truth resonated: the real heroes are often unseen. They do not shout. They do not seek attention. They act, with courage, with discipline, and with control. The diner returned to normal, but the lesson would linger forever.